So my guest today is Jessie Thomson, head of the IFRC's country delegation in Türkiye. Jessie, thank you for joining the Red Vest podcast today.
It's my sincere pleasure. I love the podcast, so I'm really honored to be here.
Great to have you. Türkiye has been very much at the center of some of the most pressing humanitarian crises in recent years. For example, we just marked the 2-year anniversary of the devastating earthquakes that rocked Türkiye and Syria 2 years ago in early February. And of course, it's played a tremendous role in accommodating refugees feeling conflict in Syria. At the heart of that is our member national society, the Turkish Red Crescent, which leads our humanitarian response there. Can you start by talking about the humanitarian situation now and what the IFRC and the Turkish Red Crescent are doing?
Absolutely. It's indeed true that Türkiye has faced a lot of very serious humanitarian challenges in recent years. And of course, we are very mindful of the earthquakes that struck 2 years ago in February 2023. It was one of the most devastating disasters that we have seen in the region in years, decades even, and had a very massive impact across 11 provinces here in Türkiye, and really impacting millions of people. More than 55,000 people died between Türkiye and Syria in the earthquakes, and there was massive destruction across 11 provinces. And so it was one of those disasters where no matter how prepared a country or a national Red Cross or Red Crescent society is, that the international components are needed, that call for help is needed. And TRC talks about that a lot. We work here in partnership with the Turkish Red Crescent. They're a very strong national society with immense capacity, but they knew as soon as the disaster struck that they were going to need to push that button to call on their international Red Cross, Red Crescent family to support them in the response to this crisis. And the IFRC Secretariat, as well as our membership, has been standing alongside TRC and the affected communities since day one.
The earthquakes response is a good example of local action led by the Turkish Red Crescent, backed up by global solidarity of the IFRC and our network of national societies around the world. In a world looking for sustainable approaches to dealing with large humanitarian crises, would you say this is a model that should get more attention perhaps and be emulated?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that the response in Türkiye is really an amazing example of exactly what we aspire to be as the IFRC network, which is as local as possible and as global as necessary. And TRC was on the ground within 20 minutes serving hot meals. They scaled up to provide millions and millions and millions of meals in line with their role under the National Disaster Response Plan within days. And that capacity was in place. They were very well placed in their auxiliary role in relation to their government, with a clear role under the National Disaster Management Plan, and they were prepared. They were ready. They had SOPs in place. They knew what triggered international assistance requests. They knew how to respond. And we were then able to activate very quickly the tools in our toolbox to bring the solidarity of the international partners of the IFRC network to back up their response. They've been on the front lines. They know communities. Their volunteers are the ones with relationships with communities. Their staff, extremely professional, have been there alongside communities, and we've been able to stand alongside them to support them, to bring additional capacity where they needed it, but really also to actually get out of their way where they didn't need our support. And what I always say about this response that's amazing is the scale. The scale is massive. We reached 11.6 million people with relief items. That's just an incredible scale. Massive cash distributions were done in the early days, as well as part of our livelihoods response in partnership with Turkish Red Crescent. And that's because they were able, they were ready, and they were a very strong partner to be able to respond. And we had 55 partner national societies from the Red Cross, Red Crescent family come to support the appeal to channel funds through IFRC, to provide staff, relief items, through our coordination mechanisms in support of a Türkiye and Turkish Red Crescent-led response. And I think that was sort of how it's supposed to work. And that readiness was a key part of that capacity that was already in place, but also the partnership and the strong collaboration between TRC and IFRC was really the ability to really take it to scale and have meaningful impact as the IFRC network, with really TRC in the driver's seat, following communities and responding to the needs of communities where they were most needed.
One of the big challenges facing the humanitarian world these days is the question of trust. It's sort of an invisible element, which is nonetheless essential when it comes to working with communities in emergencies, whether it's storms, epidemics, earthquakes, anything really. But we're also living in a time where misinformation and disinformation are rampant and affecting the trust communities have in institutions and organizations like ours. I know this is something that you feel very strongly about. How do you see this challenge, and what do we need to do about it? How do we address it?
I really feel that this is the most important challenge to the humanitarian sector and to the IFRC today. And it trust and the importance of trust is relevant at every level of our work. It's relevant in our teams. If we don't have high trust environments, we can't innovate. We can't create psychologically safe environments. We can't create, those dynamic teams that are really up for the challenge that we face today. But the same applies to our partnership with national societies. We need trust with especially the host national society like the Turkish Red Crescent in order to be able to respond, because those early days are complicated, they're messy, and if we have trust and high levels of trust, you can make decisions together quickly and really overcome a lot of the challenges we face. And if you don't have trust, the opposite is of course the case. And trust between ourselves and communities is also so fundamental. And when that trust breaks down, it can be extremely hard to rebuild it. And we are under a constant threat of misinformation and disinformation, really threatening to affect the trust that we have in our network, between our members, between our staff and our volunteers, and between the IFRC network, national societies, and communities. And we've done lots to try to make sure that we reconcile that in the sense that we are really working on engaging communities, ensuring we're accountable to communities and listening to communities to maintain trust. But even when we do that, social media misinformation can spiral a message well beyond the people we serve, and it can be really hard to tackle that. It takes years to build trust, but we can also lose trust in a split second, and it can be really challenging to rebuild that trust. And we felt that we had a number of experiences here in Türkiye where that was a very real threat to the operation, to our ability to serve communities, and where we had to work hard together to rebuild trust and to be able to continue to work and serve communities well.
Do you think inclusion and diversity impact trust, and how? What does that mean in the context of the humanitarian response and local development? Why do you think it's so important to our work?
I think it's really fundamental to our work because I think that we are most effective and most able to respond when we understand the diverse needs of the communities we serve. And in order to understand the diverse needs of the communities we serve, we need diverse teams. And we need the diverse teams to have their voices heard, because if we only hear one set of voices, we're not benefiting from that richness, that knowledge, that expertise which exists within our teams. And you have to have psychological safety and trust in order for all of those voices to be heard, in order for us to really do our work well and to serve communities well. We've been doing some really interesting work in Europe region on trust, because I'm a big believer that trust is not just an abstract concept, but it's actually a set of competencies and behaviors that we can use in our day-to-day work that actually foster trust. And that includes things like clarifying expectations, following through on commitments, speaking directly and trying to really be clear about your intent, your reason for doing things so that it's not misunderstood, to listening well, to really ensuring we listen first as opposed to listening later or pretending to listen. All of those things are very small things, but if you apply them as a leader in your team, as well as in the way we work, it can be transformative to building trust. And I think we're trying to demystify trust in the region and in the delegation here to say this is not just like a fluffy thing that is theoretical. It's actually key to our work, and there are ways to foster trust that are really concrete. And it's a way of leading that really, I think, produce totally different results, really, really positive results, both in the communities we're working as well as in the teams that we're working with.
Would you say being a woman leader in the humanitarian field affects how you build trust?
I think that we have had a certain leadership style in the humanitarian sector that didn't necessarily show all of those competencies that help us build trust. There was a time when that sort of culture of, command and control, the boss is the only one who knows what's right. The boss can never admit failure or vulnerability, when that was really celebrated in our sector, and where that was very much a pervasive culture in our sector, partially because of the complex environments in which we work, and that sometimes being a needed leadership style to just get it done when things are really in the heat of the moment. And I think that was dominated primarily by men. But I think that men and women are really reflecting on a different kind of leadership in our sector that is authentic, that is vulnerable, that is direct and honest, that admits failure, that listens to staff, that collaborates. And I think that can be really transformative. I think as a woman, I sometimes have more space to lead that way than my male colleagues, because of expectations around what I'll be like as a leader versus what men will be like or should be like as a leader. And so I do think there is a gender dynamic to it, but I also know tons of men in the humanitarian sector that really do want to lead differently, also value that authenticity, that vulnerability, that listening first, collaborative way of leading. And I see how it's changing in our sector, and how needed it is, and how important it is, and how much then it trickles down to everything else, and how it, even in terms of our partnerships with national societies in the network, we are a big organization of 191 national societies that is like as diverse as it comes in terms of shape, size, perspective. We have a shared set of fundamental principles, but very often we're coming at things from totally different perspectives. And if we're not admitting when we messed up and righting that wrong and fixing it with one of the partners, and instead getting defensive or standing our ground or kind of circling the horses or whatever you want to say, then that breaks down trust, and that stops us from doing our work well. And as soon as we can just really be clear on our intent, work together, really figure out, okay, I really messed this up. I meant to do this. I didn't do it right. I didn't do this in an inclusive way. I should have consulted you. You can get back on track really fast. But it takes humility. It takes a comfort with sort of owning those moments. But I find it can be so transformative to how we work together. And it really helps us get rid of all that noise and focus on what's most important, which is the communities we serve and the impact that we want to have on those communities under very difficult conditions in a world that is increasingly hostile to the work that we do.
You mentioned something along the lines of speed of trust and 13 foundational behaviors, which I think you've already touched upon.
Yeah.
Is there more you could say about that?
Yeah, it's a great book that I highly recommend called Speed of Trust. And I came across it years ago through a leadership training in a previous organization. And I find it really practical because it really demystifies trust. It really emphasizes why trust is so important and the consequences of an erosion of trust in terms of organizational culture and effectiveness. Low trust environments, people are afraid to speak up. They don't innovate. They don't take risks. They don't take initiative. Leaders don't know when something's going wrong because it's not surfacing. They're not at their best. There's bureaucracy, barriers, blame. Organizations that are high trust are full of innovation, freedom to fail, effectiveness, happy people, engaged people, and really better results. And so this framework is super useful from my perspective, and the 13 behaviors are really practical. But it's amazing because there's some that I'm better at than others. Like everyone, we're all human, right? We all are. Our beautiful snowflake selves, right? We're all different, and for a long time. And I think this is typical of leaders in senior leadership roles. We don't necessarily listen well. We listen. We kind of pretend to listen, but we don't listen well. And we often don't listen first. And one of the core behaviors, one of the 13 behaviors is listen first. Not listen sometime, eventually, but listen first. And wait before you form your opinion. And don't just pretend to listen and wait to say what you wanted to say, but listen, understand, be curious, be ready to be influenced. And it's really hard. As a leader, we're like, we got to get it done. You come in my office, I want to give you a solution. But actually just stopping and listening first and really practicing that can be super transformative, because then you surface those diversity of perspectives that you need as a leader and that organization needs in order to be effective and impactful. But I have learned that it's a practice. We have good intentions. We don't wake up in the morning, saying we're not going to listen, but we have a busy day. We're running from meeting to the next. We're in a defensive mode because we were just sort of fighting about something. And it can be hard sometimes to reground ourselves in those behaviors or in those good, effective ways of being. So I always sort of try to go back to those. I pull them back out. Some days are better than others as a leader. And I think, it's a really useful set of reminders of, what can help us to really make that difference in terms of how we can foster an environment that is the most effective. And again, to serve communities well, because we are an effective, healthy, high-functioning organization.
Looking forward into the future a little bit, what other big challenges, changes, but also opportunities do you see on the horizon?
Yeah, I can't help but reflect on the moment we're in and what we've talked about already in terms of the erosion of trust in humanitarian assistance, in foreign aid. We're in this moment of very real reckoning. And this has been coming for years. This is not actually new to this week. This has been coming for years. We know that populations have been questioning the effectiveness of aid. And I think that, and we're now also grappling with that in the context of misinformation and disinformation in an increasingly digitalized world that is moving at a speed that is so hard for us to come to grips with and to keep up with. And I think we really are at a turning point, and how we respond to this moment as humanitarian actors, as IFRC, as a sector, will be transformative. And I think there's an opportunity in that, but it does require us to respond differently to this moment. We tend, I think, generally, not just IFRC, but as a sector, to be very risk adverse in terms of how we communicate. We're risk adverse in terms of saying the wrong thing, and that comes from a good place because we work on complex issues that are nuanced and not always black and white, and where people's lives are at risk if we say the wrong thing. So it doesn't come from the wrong place. But because of that, sometimes I think we don't confront reality. We don't show that we're listening to the feedback we're getting about aid and about the work that we do. And then we don't build trust, and we don't restore trust. And so I think this is a moment where we have to be radically honest. And that includes about where we're failing, because we are not perfect. We need to be much faster in terms of our ability to respond and confident in our messaging. And I think that and show that we're listening, as opposed to sort of staying in our safe place of our key messages that are very carefully crafted and very well thought out. And it comes back to, again, those trust competencies. It applies in individual interactions, but it also applies in how we engage with the public. We have to speak truthfully. We have to speak in a way. We have to clarify our intent. We need people to understand where we're coming from, understand that what we do is hard, understand why it's hard, and understand how we are constantly improving to have impact, to serve communities well, to use every dollar effectively. And I think that is an opportunity. Even though it feels very daunting right now, we owe it to the communities we serve to be able to continue to serve them. And I think we owe it to those that have supported us to really show that we are listening, and we're trying to figure out how we adapt and change constantly, as opposed to doing the same old thing for 50 years, because we haven't as a sector, but we haven't been very good about talking about it and helping people understand that.
So we talked a little bit about the future. Can we go back a little bit to you personally?
Sure.
And you can take a few moments to think about it. How did you end up where you are? You come from Canada. I think you mentioned that earlier. So maybe tell us, was there someone that inspired you or mentored you, or was there someone that you looked up to and said, I want to do what they do when I grow up? How did you end up with the Red Cross? And I know you've worked for some other humanitarian organizations before, but give us a journey. Take us on the journey that is Jessie's journey.
Yeah, it is a long and winding road, as it always is with careers and this work. I don't know how I ended up here. I feel so lucky and so grateful to do the work that I do, and I don't for a second take it for granted, because I think it is such a privilege to stand alongside Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies in the work that they do, a privilege to serve communities, to be alongside people in their most desperate moments, and to honor that moment with solidarity and with allyship. I started out as a volunteer with a refugee resettlement program in Canada. And that was the first, I was like a small town girl from Kincardine, Ontario, Canada. I moved to the big city for university, and I didn't know anything about anything. And I started volunteering with this refugee resettlement program. And my friend, dear friend, still dear friend, Arash, arrived just before September 11th, 2001. I met him at the airport in a miniskirt and a tank top. He was arriving from Pakistan, having come from Afghanistan originally. I think.
So he was a refugee.
He was coming as a resettled refugee, to Canada. And and my friendship with Arash and that early connection through volunteerism with someone else who was just like me, but that had tremendously different life experiences, really was the beginning of this humanitarian journey. And it was sort of that moment that I knew that was, what I wanted to do with my life. And then, I followed my heart, basically, much to the dismay of my parents, because I always make terrible decisions when it comes to like long-term planning and things like this. But I really have always said that I have a vocation, not a career, a purpose. And that purpose has always been my guiding light. And so that's driven different career changes along the way, and different leaders have influenced me along the way. And there are many of them, so many. My manager when I worked at the Canadian Ministry of Foreign Affairs was a former ICRC staff member. And so she planted the seed of the Red Cross in me. And that led me to ICRC at a certain point. I had beautiful sponsors and champions in female leaders at my time at CARE who often saw in me abilities and capacity that I didn't yet see in myself. And they would say to me, you'd be great in that job. And it was the first time that I thought, oh yeah, I could do that job. So they helped me give myself, confidence. And along the way, I would find these moments of random acts of kindness. There's a colleague from within IFRC who I went to see when I just came back from Pakistan, and I didn't know him. I went to see him. Someone connected me with him and was like, this, he'll give you life advice. And I was so beside myself about what I should do with my life and how I wanted my family life. I wanted a partner, but this Red Cross life was not really congruent with that. As a woman in my 30s, I was like, how do I do this? And he was so kind and said, there will always be a way for you to have purpose and impact, and you just find your way, and you have to always put, family first, because, that can always, the rest will follow. And, those small acts of kindness and wisdom along the way also helped me to navigate that balance between professional choices, purpose, vocation, and family life, personal choices that are all very tied up together. So I have been so lucky throughout my career to have those touch points. And someone said to me once, asking for advice is just asking for directions. And I really do take that on board, because I think it's such good advice, because sometimes you need directions, and the people around you know you better sometimes than you know yourself, and sometimes they can point you to the mountain over there, and you think, wait a minute, I do want to climb that mountain. That would be a good place for me. And so that's I don't know. I went from government to ICRC and then to CARE. I had 10 beautiful years with CARE in very different roles. Had my babies and had time where I could be in Canada to do that and with my family. And then I joined IFRC, first in Greece and now here in Turkey. And if you'd have asked me 20 years ago at the start of my career if this is where I would end up, I've never been able to tell you that. I think that's the beauty of life and of career and of the winding path that takes us on these wild journeys. But here we are, and I just feel so lucky.
You talked about having babies, so you have children.
I do, yes.
And your family is with you, anymore. Right? Your family is with you. Can you talk about the being a woman, a mother? How do you have a supportive partner? How do your children view your career? How old are they? Can you talk a little bit about the family dynamics?
Yeah, it would be my pleasure, because I think it's part of who we are as professionals, right?
Exactly.
I have a very supportive partner. He and I have been, our first date was 20 years ago. So we've been together a long time. And so we kind of grew up together as well. And actually, when I was with ICRC in Pakistan, I was grappling with, what do I do to another unaccompanied mission? And we were on a Skype call, agonizing over this. It was before we were married. And he said, whatever you want to do this. If you love this, do it, and I will figure it out. And that was the moment I decided to move back to Canada, because I said, well, that's the partner that I want for this crazy journey. Somebody who's going to stand by me, who's going to support my dreams. And that has been true throughout my professional life, to have that person cheering me on and really backing me up when it comes to the home life stuff has been so important. It's a thankless job being my spouse, actually. And my kids are 6 and 9.
I'm sure he would disagree.
Well, no, I think he enjoys and is, he's really committed to playing that role in our family as well, in the way in which we share the load. And our kids are 6 and 9. Mm-hmm. And so they were little when we moved to Greece. My son had just turned 3. And they are amazing. They're resilient, and they have come along for this ride. Mm-hmm. And they're proud of their mama. I always try at least once or twice in the year to bring them to something related to the work that we do. Mm-hmm. Last year, Rose, my daughter, who's 9, came to our World Humanitarian Day event with the Turkish Red Crescent. So she heard the Turkish Red Crescent president speak, Turkish Red Crescent's first ever female president, who's an amazing, brilliant, dynamic woman. She heard her mama make her speech, and then she was there to hear others talk about the work of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent and of TRC here in Türkiye, and it sat with her. She gets it. She gets what the red vest means. And I think that's really lucky. And sometimes a good big burden, because these poor kids, they don't dare say it's not fair because it's not, I can't watch TV, it's not fair. No, you get the full, I'll tell you what's not fair. The people who are least responsible for climate change are the most impacted by it. So the kids know the world that we live in is complex, that they have a lot of privilege, and that they also have a role and a responsibility to use that privilege. So we'll see how it all turns out. They're little environmentalists these days, which brings me a lot of joy. But it's not easy figuring out the balance. And I've had to make decisions throughout my career where I pivoted away from something professionally because it didn't work for my family life. I ended up in fundraising and communications at CARE, partially because I was in an emergency response role and I had a 1-year-old, and I was like, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. I want to be present with my little baby. I don't want to miss out on it. And so how else can I have impact in this moment? And I left ICRC because I wanted to have kids, and I could see in my early 30s the path of unaccompanied missions was not a path that was going to make that very easy in terms of family life. And so those have been maybe sacrifices or, professional choices. But they were always the right choices in terms of, of all the pieces that make us human, family and profession and purpose and service. So, but it's an adventure. It's not done yet.
Absolutely not. We will watch and see what else you do in your career, Jessie. It's going to be, I'm sure, really exciting. We always ask our guests to bring an object that has some personal meaning to them. Can you tell us what you brought and show it to the camera, and explain why it has a special meaning for you? Absolutely.
So I brought this pin. It's the Turkish Red Crescent women pin. And it's a pin that the Turkish Red Crescent Women's Association wear and make, actually, in order to celebrate women within the National Society. And it's very special to me because it was given to me by the Turkish Red Crescent president, Dr. Fatma. She's the first ever female president of the Turkish Red Crescent in their very long history. And she has worked hard to continue to encourage women in the National Society to become volunteers, to join the governance, to work within the National Society. And she inspires me so much in that effort And I'm always amazed when I see her in the field. Very often young female volunteers want to take a picture with her and want to spend time and talk to her. And they're so excited to see her. And it's just such a reminder of how important it is for women in our network to have those models, to be able to see them, to connect with them, and to be able to see themselves in those roles. And she's a very special leader. She's a really inspiring woman and a very special friend. And she does small things in her leadership that are very, very powerful to be inclusive. And I think that's a testament to her character and her as a leader. But one of the things that she does and has done for me since the day I arrived is we'll be at a big event. There's like ministers, 1 million people. She is like the star of the show. And she'll like look for me in the crowd and bring me to the front, or, you know, make sure there's a seat at the table to honor and include. And that respect and that support and inclusion also then sort of so much follows from that. And so that's why this pin is so special to me. It's getting quite worn. I feel like I need another one. And carries so much meaning, because it's about how we can lead, how we can create environments that are inclusive, and the importance of having our national societies represent all of society. And that's what I think is so special about it to me.
Jessie, at the end of the day, with all that's going on in the world, who or what inspires you? Perhaps brings you comfort or hope?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that inspires me. I think you have to be a bit optimistic to work in this field, because it can otherwise feel quite daunting. And I think it's the little stuff. It's those small acts of kindness. We've just been collecting and meeting with communities, collecting stories and meeting with communities for the 2-year anniversary. And we've heard so many people who were affected by the earthquake talk about the importance of the assistance they received, be it cash or livelihood support. But actually what so many have said that has really stuck with me is that it was the Turkish Red Crescent staff or volunteers that were there with them, that sat with them, that talked to them, that accompanied them when they had to go to the hospital or when they couldn't figure out how to access services. That solidarity, that act of kindness is what was actually more important than the assistance. It makes me emotional, actually. Yeah. And that inspires me.
Thank you for sharing that, Jessie. You mentioned earlier your daughter knows what the red vest is, what it means. So what does it mean to you, the name of this podcast? And you've worn it many times in Greece, in Türkiye. So what does the red vest mean to you?
I'll just take a minute to compose myself. Yeah, I mean, I love my red jacket too. Like, I'm red in all, red jacket, red vest. I really embrace the red. The red vest, there's something kind of amazing about how the IFRC network comes together in this universality of our work. And I'm always amazed. Like, you go to a little branch in the middle of nowhere, and there is the same red vest and the same Aridzna painted photo on the wall and the same grit and the same passion. And I love it. And I think that red vest is what really unites us. And it's not visibility gear. It's our belonging, right? It's what helps volunteers feel part of something. It gives them that sense of, like, I represent this organization right now. And I think we all wear it also with the responsibility that comes with it. And a good example, when I was in Greece, we were doing a visit with some volunteers from the National Society that were in their uniforms, in their red vest. And they said, wait, we have to get the first aid kit from the car. we weren't going to do first aid. We were going to see an affected area that was more or less a town that had been evacuated. So it wasn't that we were going to do first aid, but they said, like, we're in our uniform right now. If someone needs first aid, we have to be able to respond. So we're carrying our kit with us right now. And I think that just shows that responsibility that people feel for the vest, and how powerful it is as something that is a symbol of our commitment and our purpose.
Thank you, Jessie, for sharing your expertise and insights with our audience, and for allowing us to get to know you a little bit.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here, and really nice to reconnect with you, Sasha.